If I tell you Renaissance art, what are the names that come to your mind? Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. Now imagine a world where Leonardo da Vinci would sign most of his paintings because he's afraid that people think they're someone else's work. Imagine a world where Michelangelo is made fun of if he tries to depict historical, religious, mythological scenes. These are the shared experiences of a lot of women in the art scene of Renaissance. Still, with all these limitations, there were women who shattered this man-centered world of art and became role models for the next generations of women. And they showed that with a little bit of luck and a huge amount of talent, it is possible to stand out. So let's get to know life, art, and struggles of three biggest names among the women artists of Renaissance. So 8th of March is right around the corner. That's the International Women's Day. And I thought, now that I'm in the headspace of European Renaissance art and I'm reading about that, why not make a video about the women artists of that time? But before getting into the lives of these three artists, I need to first paint a picture of how women were viewed in the Renaissance and why it is that we know so few female artists. So let's roll out the misogyny counter. So Renaissance, that means rebirth, right? One of the things that is actually reborn is a lot of interest and trust in the world of ancient thinkers. And Aristotle, being one of these thinkers, believes that a woman is a flawed type of man, and he attributes the action of procreation to men. And he believes that women are just passive receivers of the created human being. The audacity! So by extension, art and creative work can only be done by men. So the sentence, "that woman is a great artist," means nothing in Renaissance. It's like saying, "that ice lake is so warm." So it was thought that women just intrinsically can be artists, and that's why there aren't any women artists around. Yeah, there weren't many opportunities for women to learn fine art skills. So to learn visual art, women had to have certain connections. One of the places a woman could learn art was in the convent. This is the continuation of the medieval tradition where many of the nuns in different convents were experts at making illuminated books. Another group are those who are related to male artists. Women couldn't get apprenticeships with other masters, but the daughters and wives of artists didn't really need to. They already grew up in a workshop. Or occasionally, they might have a very liberal father who would let their daughter learn painting. So you can see how rare it was for women to have the chance to study art back in the Renaissance. However, that's not the full story. Right now, today, 21st century, we don't know that many Renaissance women artists. Sure, the times were extremely rough for female talent to have a chance to blossom, but in the 16th century, there were at least 40 women active in painting, sculpture, and printmaking, just in Italy. There were many nuns who learned painting and drawing in the convents. Then how is it that we only know a few names from these women? Many of them are just names with no artworks that historians can confidently assign to them. The handful that I'm going to mention in this video are rare cases that have a good number of surviving artworks. And that is all because of the male-centered history of art. You see, studying the history of art became a real thing in the 18th and 19th century. And like every other field, men were the dominant voice here too. And of course, men gave much more voice to the male artists through the history, and the works of most of the women artists were either forgotten or they were mislabeled to a contemporary male artist. It's only in the last few decades that scholars are trying to revive women artists through the history, going back to the Renaissance. And so let's start our list with one of the artists that came back into art history only in the past 20 years. The first famous female painter of 16th century Florence. In Florence, if you take a visit to Basilica di Santa Maria Novella, you can see a massive painting of the Last Supper. The figures of the apostles are almost life-sized, and the detail work is captivating. What comes as a surprise is when you look at the far left of the painting, you can see the artist's sign. It says, "Pray for the paintress." Paintress. This work is actually the earliest known painting of the Last Supper by a woman. The artist is Plautilla Nelli, a nun born in 1524 in Florence. She joined the convent of Santa Caterina when she was 14, which was a very common thing back then for educated girls. She learned painting and drawing as she was studying to become a nun. We don't really know who she learned painting from. Some say she was self-taught, but she did receive a bunch of drawings that were done by Fra Bartolomeo. And she studied those and copied elements from them. She ended up not only working as a painter, painting different religious scenes, but she actually led a workshop of at least 8 women painting in the convent. She's one of the 4 women among more than 100 artists in Giorgio Vasari's super famous book where he talks about famous artists of Renaissance. He says about her, "In the houses of men throughout Florence, there are so many of her pictures that it would be tedious to attempt to speak of them all." So she was pretty famous. She couldn't really sell her own paintings though, because you shouldn't pay money to a lady, let alone a nun, but through the church she could get commissions and sell her paintings. It is remarkable that she didn't really do much small-scale work other than her drawings. She worked with pretty large canvas and altar paintings, like this work, The Lamentation with Saints. It is an altar painting that shows the famous scene of Christ's body with mourners all around. But the most famous work of hers right now is the Last Supper that you saw in the beginning. This is a huge 7 meter by 2 meters oil painting. Not a fresco, oil painting. The Last Supper was a usual subject for painting in the Renaissance, with the most famous, of course, being Da Vinci's Last Supper. Similar to that, Nelli's Last Supper also depicts Jesus and the apostles along a narrow and long table, just like the tables where the nuns would sit and eat and look at the painting. The simple background of the work draws the nuns into the atmosphere of the painting as if it was a continuation of the dining area. And it's interesting how one figure is sitting at the opposite side of the table away from others, and he's missing his halo. We can also see he is clutching a coin purse. This is, of course, the picture of Judas. And as we saw, Nelli signed the picture with the phrase, "Pray for the paintress." This is the kind of cheeky signings that is a mix of being proud and humble at the same time. So she boldly claimed her place in art history, which is rare for a woman of her time. Plautilla Nelli's works and importance was lost for so long, until just about 20 years ago when she was revived. I'll put a link in the description to a video of the restoration of Nelli's works. Check them out if you want. But now it's time to get out of Florence and go to Cremona to see one of the most influential female artists of the age. But before we do that, let me just quickly remind you that the like and subscribe buttons are right underneath the video. So thank you in advance. A young girl has no business learning art and painting and all that. That is not the norm in the Renaissance. So it's pretty nice for the young Sofonisba to have a father that is willing to break these norms. Amilcara Anguissola had 7 children, 6 of them girls, and the elder child is Sofonisba Anguissola. They were one of the old and noble families of the city, but being noble doesn't always mean you're rich. So in this setting, Sofonisba gets very well educated in different arts and crafts that included fine arts, like drawing and painting and such. When you add the artistic talent of Sofonisba to this education background, the result is one of the most influential women who shattered the glass ceiling and became one of the most celebrated portrait artists. From her childhood, she started showing this talent, and his father noticed it. So Sofonisba started getting commissions for paintings, and that became a great help for bringing money into the family. And to advertise her abilities and herself as an artist, she created a lot of self-portraits. These self-portraits acted like a portfolio piece, and in most of them, she's not only showing her painting power, but she's also showing her virtuosity and chastity. She paints this small self-portrait with these words: "The maiden Sofonisba Anguissola, depicted by her own hand from a mirror at Cremona." But the most famous one is definitely this one, where she shows herself doing what she does best, and not just painting anything. She's painting the Virgin Mary and the Child. Here, like most of the other self-portraits, she's wearing black. That is a sign of austerity for women. By the way, this is one of the earliest examples of a self-portrait of the artist showing the tools of their craft. Doing such a thing was not normal among the men. If you want to know more about self-portraits of this era, check out my video, I'll link it here. So by showing her abilities, the commissions started coming. Notice that most of her works are portraits. You rarely see religious scenes or historical paintings in her works. One reason is that in public's eye, painting a portrait was just imitating what is right there in front of you. So it doesn't need any creativity. And we remember that they believed women were not creative by nature. So that would make portraits the best fitting genre of painting for a woman. But don't get me wrong, this was not normal. People saw Sofonisba as a miracle. A woman being an artist, impossible, must have been the miracle of God. Her ability in depicting details and putting emotions in her paintings was impressive, and because of all that, Sofonisba later in her life was invited to Spain and started working as a lady-in-waiting for Elizabeth of Valois, wife of King Philip II. She couldn't be hired as a court painter because she's a woman, but that's exactly what she was. She painted so many of the royal family in her time there. Of course, they didn't pay her for her paintings because, that's very rude to pay a lady with money. Instead, they gifted her with precious jewelry and fabrics. Many of her paintings were mislabeled and falsely attributed to other artists, and she was also mostly forgotten until she was revived, and her importance was again highlighted by feminist art historians in the 1990s. This is her last painting, which is a self-portrait, and she passed away in 1626 in Palermo. And with that, we now leave Palermo to go to Bologna to meet another trailblazer. Take a look at this portrait of a Bolognese noble lady. You see this painting, you can see the treasury of the family. You can see just how rich they are. The detail work on the expensive clothes is showing riches. Silk with gold and thread embroidery. She's wearing 2 golden rings and a pair of earrings. A golden chain is dangling from her waist, and she isn't even wearing the 2 gold bracelets on the table. And in her lap, she has these kind of luxury dogs, and it's a mark of her fidelity to her husband. After all, she is the wife of a senator. And who better to trust with the painting of such a portrait than the one and only Lavinia Fontana. Lavinia Fontana was the daughter of a Bolognese painter, and she was born in 1552. And growing up in her father's workshop, she learned painting directly from him. And like Sofonisba, she turned out so talented that she became an important part of the income of the workshop. She was actually the first professional woman painter of Europe. Even when she got married, she didn't have a normal dowry. Instead, her father kept her working in the workshop so she would make money instead of the dowry. She was so good at portraying the riches of people, like the portrait of Costanza Lidossi that we saw earlier. So many of the noble women of Bologna were competing with each other to book Lavinia and get their portraits done. And the dogs everywhere. That's a trope in many of her noble women portraits because it shows fidelity. Her attention to detail and her fame as a portrait artist is very similar to Sofonisba. But portraits are just half of her works. She has a lot of historical and religious paintings. She has done altar pieces even. Her historical religious paintings are very masterfully done. Here is an example where she paints 2 of Easter-related scenes in the same picture. Look in the foreground. You can see Mary Magdalene seeing Christ after resurrection, and he's gardening. In the background, you can see Virgin Mary and again Mary Magdalene approaching the tomb of Christ. Another one of the interesting things about Lavinia Fontana is that among the 100 or so surviving pieces from her, she has signed almost half of them. That's not normal. The male painters rarely did that in Italy. Yet she probably had to sign her works so they wouldn't be wrongly attributed to other male artists. Finally, we gotta talk about the controversial aspect of Fontana. Of course, we know that painting nudes was an absolute no-no for women. But drawing nudes was a big part of studying how to draw the figure accurately and naturally. Even today, that's the case. But Fontana, or any other woman, couldn't do that. Still, she had a few paintings about mythological scenes involving nude figures. She might be the first woman who painted nude figures. And I don't know how much I can show off these paintings without YouTube starting screaming at me. That was another one of the glass ceilings that she broke and gave confidence to other female artists of the next generations. In 1611, a bronze medallion was made in her honor, and in 1614, she passed away in Rome. So, these were three of the most famous women artists from the Renaissance. And although I'm saying Renaissance, they are all from the last century of the Renaissance, the 16th century. And we didn't go beyond Italy, but to be honest, most of the women artists of this age are from Italy, especially when you consider the body of work that survives now. It is much more significant for the women of Italy that we talked about. But we're not done. Once we get into the 17th century, the Baroque era of art in Europe, we're going to see some more exceptional artists that took advantage of the route that artists like Nelli, Anguissola, and Fontana had paved for them and became influential artists. This is what's coming next in the next video. So if you don't want to miss that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That is the greatest help and support that you can give me right now. So why not? And also, the links to further information on the artists and the sources I used are all in the description. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.